Bias Property Group. We take the pain out of property investing. This video is an introduction into one of the most common property investing strategies, buy, refurbish, refinance, abbreviated to BRR. In this strategy, the investor purchases a property to which they can add considerable value. This is mainly done by refurbishing dilapidated or outdated houses, thus enhancing the value. These deals are structured to allow the investor to then refinance at the new improved value and to release as much as possible of their original investment. Most serious investors will then recycle the cash released into their next deal. This property is a typical example requiring substantial refurbishment to bring it up to standard for the area. Note the neighbouring properties, which both have recent new roofs and windows. It is highly likely that this property, with a realistic asking price of £90,000, was the home of elderly, even now deceased occupants, and typically their heirs would prefer to sell rather than to have the hassle of renovating it for themselves. Now, although a rarity in the immediate post-Covid market, this property is offered considerably below market value. Comparable properties in good condition have been selling for between £140,000 and £160,000 within the last 12 months. Now, Bias Property Group recommends that investors look well beyond just the price though. You need to ensure that the property meets all location and rental demand criteria in order to avoid problems later. Now, as a traditionally constructed semi-detached house of approximately 65 square metres floor area, that is a good start. 3 bedrooms are another good sign, particularly for investors looking to rent the finished property out. These properties have the highest demand and tend to attract long-term tenants. The large lounge and kitchen give plenty of scope for creativity, and the separate hallway is a desirable feature for many. Dependent on location, this layout is great for buy-to-let and also good for serviced accommodation, and could even potentially become a 5-bedroom HMO, house of multiple occupation, some with en-suites. We would rate the scale of refurbishment required as moderate to substantial. Externally, a new roof is likely to be needed in the near future, although it's not necessarily immediately required. The windows, however, do appear to be unsuitable and in very poor repair, so we would definitely be replacing those. The driveway is in poor condition, and if it's not repaired, it will inevitably detract considerably from the appeal of the otherwise refurbished house. When we look at drives, it's usually cheapest to consider laying gravel, but in this instance dealing with the drain cover is going to need careful consideration. Internally, the bathroom decor is very tired looking. The suite itself is in reasonable condition, but the popularity of avocado waned many moons ago. The kitchen is basically a throwback to the 50s and will require complete refitting. The lounge is a good size, but only a mother could really love that carpet. The gas fire is dated and will benefit from replacement or removal. Not shown in this view, but the house also has central heating, which is likely to need updating. The risers for this bed tend to support the theory that the house was occupied by elderly persons, now moved into care or even deceased. Unless alterations are envisaged, then new floor coverings and redecoration will probably suffice for refurbishing rooms like this. Taking everything into consideration, it should be perfectly possible to complete all required refurbishment works within a budget of £25,000. There are other factors about this property which potentially give scope for the purchaser to add considerable value in addition to that added by the refurbishment. As you can see, there's plenty of room at the side and the rear to extend, and an extension to 2 stories should be possible if desired. It's also worth exploring the possibilities of constructing a completely separate new dwelling or even multiple dwellings on the very large rear garden. However, at first sight, it looks as though access may be an issue here. Of course, there's no need for any incoming investor to commit to extending or developing at all, but just bear in mind that simply obtaining planning permission will add considerable value and increase your potential future profits. So we're going to assume that this property, which had an asking price of £90,000 and a potential value after refurbishment of up to £160,000, we're going to assume it sells at £100,000. Now, that's not particularly likely in the current market, but it's useful for us to use these figures. We're presenting an example here, not a case study. Mortgage lenders will generally advance 75% of the purchase price or the valuation, whichever is the lowest. This leaves the purchaser to come up with a 25% deposit. Now, because we're discussing the BRR strategy here, which involves refinancing, it is worth noting that most lenders will not actually allow refinancing, remortgages, within 6 months, or for some of them even a year, of the initial loan. And since the whole point of the BRR strategy is to buy low, add value, and then get as much money back out as quickly as possible through refinancing, it may be worth considering using bridging finance for the initial purchase. Bridging finance is short term only. It's more expensive than a mortgage, but it can be extremely flexible. Bridging lenders will often look at the finished value of a project rather than just the purchase price or valuation. However, for the purposes of our example, we're going to continue as though we're just using a normal interest-only investment property mortgage to purchase this property. So, with a purchase price of £100,000 and no issues with the valuation, our lender puts up £75,000 and you, the investor, put in £25,000 as your deposit. Now, obviously there are other costs associated with purchase. For the purposes of this example, we've aggregated them all and put them at £4,000. Now, the refurbishment cost is estimated at £25,000. So this makes the total to be put in by the investor £54,000. Again, a point worth noting here, Bias always advises investors to keep a contingency back, and typically we suggest 4.5% of the total invested. So to stay within our recommended parameters for this project, a prudent investor will make sure they've got access to at least £56,430 before committing to putting in £54,000. Now, equity is an important consideration when we come to doing our calculations, and your equity in the property is the difference between the asset value and the amount owed. So initially, your initial equity is actually your deposit paid, £25,000. So having successfully completed the purchase, we now go ahead and carry out the refurbishment works, adding to the value of the property and hopefully bringing it at least into line with comparable properties in good condition. Again, for the purposes of this example, we're assuming that a valuation of £145,000 post-refurbishment has been achieved, and now we're ready to move on to the refinancing part of the strategy. With a valuation of £145,000, most mortgage lenders will lend up to 75% or £108,750. So that becomes the amount of the new loan. Now, obviously there will be fees and charges associated with the remortgage, but because there's less work involved for the professionals, they are far cheaper than at original purchase, and for the purposes of our example, we're going to ignore them. The first thing that happens with the new loan is that the solicitor handling the transaction repays the old loan. In this example, this leaves £33,750, which we're calling the balance from refinancing. Now, this money is basically for you as the investor to do with as you wish. It is cash in your bank, and it reduces the original £54,000 which you had left in the deal down to £20,250. So your position now is that you have £33,750 available, either to recycle into your next deal, or if you really want, you can spend it on a car, a kitchen or a holiday. In addition, you have your equity in the property, which, to remind you, is the property value minus borrowing, and the equity has increased from £25,000 to £36,250. Now, at this point, we'll just briefly mention no money left in deals because I'm sure you've heard of them. These sort of deals are becoming more and more rare in the current market, but basically it refers to a situation where after refinancing, the balance from the refinancing is actually greater than your original investments, than your original amount of money left in. As I say, it's fairly rare at the moment, but don't worry because of capital growth, there will always come a time when you are able to take out all of your original money through refinancing. But in most cases nowadays, you're likely to have to wait a while. Financial prudence dictates that we need a way to measure investment performance. We need to ensure that it meets our requirements. Now, for most property investors, the preferred measure is return on capital employed, or ROCE. Now, true ROCE is found using net cash flow, which is essentially your rental profits, as well as the increase in your equity. But to keep things simple in this example, we're only considering equity growth. And again, to keep things simple, we're assuming that refinancing has happened a full year after the initial purchase. So to determine our increase in equity, which is to all intents and purposes our profit, we simply subtract last year's equity, which was £25,000, from this year's, which is £36,250, being the difference between the value of £145,000 and the borrowing of £108,750, and this gives us a figure for increase in equity of £11,250. Now, from a financial point of view, all we've effectively done to generate that increase in equity has been to leave our £20,250 in the deal. So now, to find our ROCE for the year, we simply divide our profits, the increase in equity, by our investment, which is the cash left in, and express it as a percentage. 55.6%. Pretty good, don't you think? Now, effectively, once we've done the refinancing, the BRR strategy is complete. Although I suppose you could extend it into the future and include future refinancings, but let's not complicate things. So, what do you do with the property now? Well, you could simply sell it, which we know is a flip, but that would be pretty pointless after having paid for the costs of a remortgage. Far better, in that case, to sell on completion of refurb and simply repay the original loan from the proceeds. So the alternative to selling is to hold on to the property. And in this particular example, there are three good reasons to do so. First reason we'll look at is taking advantage of the growth in capital value of your new asset. Now, historical data from 19th century censuses through mortgage lender paper records to the modern day land registry database show us that the average house price growth is almost 8% per annum year on year. Now, as we always prefer to err on the side of caution, we're going to illustrate the effects of capital growth at only 5% per annum. And we're going to call year one starting from when the refurbishment was complete and the valuation of £145,000 was accepted by the lenders. So, if the value grows by 5% of £145,000, then at the end of year one, our property is now going to be worth £152,250. That's an increase in value of £7,250. In year two, the value again grows by 5%. But this time it's 5% of the new starting value. This is the compounding effect in action. So by the end of year two, the house is now worth £159,863. An increase on the year of £7,613, and a total increase since the beginning of £14,863. Repeating the process until the end of year 10, we can see that the value of our house has increased by a whopping £91,190 in total. Now, the way the mortgage system works, the lender has no interest in nor claim on the appreciating asset value. All of those gains belong to their borrower. That's the investor, that's you. So in those 10 years, the value which you own in the property, that's your equity, has increased by the full amount of £91,190. I'll just glance back at the earlier slide to remind ourselves of the initial equity, but immediately after refinancing, at the start of what we're calling year one, your equity was, as you recall, £36,250. So if we now take that initial equity and we add the equity growth of £91,190 over the 10 years, at the end of year 10, your equity in the property is now £127,440. Now, we recommend that you never try this at home, but just for the sake of example, we're going to assume that you've actually left the property empty for 10 years, so it hasn't generated any cash flow from rentals. Now, you will have had to look after it properly in order to maintain the capital growth. But again, as this is an example, not a case study, we're going to ignore those costs. What you will have had to do is to pay interest on your mortgage for that entire period. Now, again, to err on the side of caution, we're going to assume an interest rate of 5%, which is substantially more than most people are paying nowadays, although recent events mean we might be creeping up towards those figures sooner rather than later. But anyway, at 5%, your total outlay over the 10 years would be £54,375. So, to determine your net gains, we're going to subtract those expenses of £54,375 from your equity in the property, £127,440, and that leaves us with £73,065. Now, the amount of capital that you've actually left in the deal, the amount of your own money left in, hasn't changed. That's still the £20,250 that it was after refinancing. So to determine your ROCE, we divide your net gain, £73,065, by your capital employed, £20,250, and because that's over 10 years, we divide it by 10 and then express it as a percentage, and we come up with a new ROCE of 36%. Now, in actual fact, 36% is still not too shabby, is it? In spite of the glaring mistake that's been made by not actually generating any income with the house during those 10 years. Now, in real life, a sensible investor like yourself will have followed our professional guidance, and you will have been renting out the property for those 10 years. You will have generated enough in rentals to cover all the mortgage interest and all the other expenses, and hopefully it will have provided a useful income from a positive surplus cash flow as well. Now, under these circumstances, and for this example neglecting any profits from the cash flow, then with no expenses to reduce it, your ROCE calculation now shows a stonking 63%. 63%. How many of these types of deal do you want? By the way, this extension to the BRR strategy is called BRRR, buy, refurbish, refinance and rent. So just to recap, capital growth is going to be there anyway, but you do really need cash flow to fund the ongoing costs. Another way of enhancing the value of your asset is to obtain planning permission to extend the property or even to develop the spare land. Simply having this permission in place substantially enhances the price should you decide to sell. Or of course you can go the whole hog and invest more of your own funds into actually carrying out the extension or development works yourself. Totally up to you. Now, we do hope you've enjoyed our take on the BRR strategy. Please be sure to watch out for our other informative content on our social media and websites. To contact us and for links to our various media, please use your smartphone to scan the QR code. Once again, thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it.